Hello and welcome to PMC English. This is Ayushi Pharasi and welcome to yet another episode of Unplugged with Masters. So in today's episode, we have a great spiritual master with us, Mahatma Das Prabhuji, who has been serving iskcon since the year 1969, who was also the temple president. Now he focuses on designing and conducting various workshops and retreats for the devotees and for the non-devotees to assist them in their spiritual growth. So without any further delay, let's get into conversation with him and let's get to know about his spiritual journey and also wisdom on various topics. So let us welcome Mahatma Das Prabhuji in this episode of Unplugged with Masters. Hare Krishna Prabhuji and welcome to PMC English. We are so honored to have you here in this episode of Unplugged with Masters.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So starting with Prabhuji, we want to know about your spiritual journey as to why and what made you to tread on the spiritual path.
Okay. Well, when I was very young, I had no idea that I would end up on this path. But around the age of 17 or 18, I started questioning my purpose. And I was very observant. I would always observe and analyze, kind of philosophical, why people are doing what they're doing, what's the result of what they're doing, are they happy doing what they're doing? And I didn't think they were that happy doing what they were doing. And so that was one problem I had. You're like, if you're told to do something and someone says, do this, it'll make you happy. And then you look at the person who told you to do it and they did it and they're not happy. Obviously, you start questioning, okay, you want me to do something that you say is going to work and you did it. Doesn't look like it worked for you. So that was one problem I had. And the second problem I had, which was a nature that started developing around, I would say maybe when I was 18, maybe 19, which was just questioning why to do anything. It was philosophical. So I had that nature to be philosophical. A lot of people just go through life and they never ask any questions. They kind of go through life blindly, So that wasn't me. I needed a why. The why is where we get the motivation, but it wasn't a career why. It was just a life why. Like why, what do you want to do? And I could tell you what I wanted to do, but I couldn't tell you like why I should do it other than, oh, it's fun. I like it. Okay. But what's a higher purpose? So it's a little different growing up in America than it is growing up in India, because our religions don't teach reincarnation. They don't even really teach about the Atma. I mean, they do, but it's not so clear. So we didn't grow up thinking, oh, well, there's another life after you die, you'll come back. There's karma, there's yoga, there's meditation. We didn't have any of this. So you got to kind of put yourself in my shoes, kind of pretty ignorant about these questions. So I used to think, okay, so I'm going to go to university and then I will specialize in something and then I'll get a job. And then I'll have raised a family and then I'll retire. And then after I retire, I'll die sooner or later. And then in between, I'll have some good times and I'll have some bad times. So it didn't make sense. I was like, why am I alive if I'm just going to be doing something 40, 50 hours a week? Maybe I'll get bored with it. Maybe I won't even like it. And I'm going to work really hard. And then I'm going to set my life up to get things that doesn't seem to be making people happy. So I'm thinking, you work hard at a job you might not like to buy things that really can't make you happy. And in between, you're just getting older. And obviously life isn't perfect. So there will be ups and downs. And, have some good times, some bad times, maybe some really difficult times, maybe some really good times. So I wanted to know, especially I wanted to know, well, what's on the other side? Because my father, for example, he died when he was 92. And he said, well, I'm not afraid to die. I lived a good life. It's over. And it'll be over soon, and that's it. There's nothing. So that's how we were raised. It's just, there's no karma. It's just over. It doesn't matter what you do. So that put me on the path. That was number one. And that desire to know became stronger when I was in university, because as I was going from class to class, I could understand that nobody actually knew. At least I wasn't getting any answers. So that was frustrating me. I think, okay, I'm in university. Um, Theoretically, university education should give me some enlightenment as to these questions, because these are pretty important questions. Why do I exist? What am I supposed to do? What happens after I die? Is there karmic reactions to what I'm doing? So I was really, really frustrated. And I want to tell you a true story. And I think for Indians, this story will be so unusual for you, because this would never, I don't think this could ever happen in India. Maybe it could happen in a movie, but even if it happened in a movie, you wouldn't believe it. So in America, professors have what's called tenure. Do you have that in India, tenure? Where once you after a certain period of time, the university cannot fire you. They can't really control you anymore. I mean, unless you do something immoral. But in terms of your teaching and the way you interact with your students in the academic sphere, they don't have any control. So I went to a philosophy class, and I'm not making this up. It's going to sound, it's a good line for a movie, but this was actually true. Philosophy professor, he must have only been in his 40s at that time. It's not like he'd been, so he maybe late 30s, so maybe we figure he'd been teaching 15 years, philosophy. And he told us his conclusion. He said, I actually don't know anything. So I don't really think it's valuable for you to come to my classes. Can you believe that? He actually said that. He was the most popular professor because you didn't have to go to his classes. And he said, you just write a term paper, and that's all you'll have to do. You can come to my classes if you want, but since I don't know anything, it's not really, I don't know if it's going to be of any value to you. And so that for me was like the icing on the cake. It's like, here's the philosophy department, and he's been teaching philosophy, and he's is as confused or perhaps more confused than I am. And so that disturbed me a lot. And so I was kind of waiting for something. I was in university and not really with any specific goal at that point, because I needed to resolve this question before I could resolve anything else. So I was kind of waiting, like something's going to happen. And that was in 1969. And so at that time in America in 1969, it was still, the hippie movement was still quite popular. Even around the universities, there's a lot of very revolutionary, it was a very revolutionary time, breaking away from norms. And one of the things the hippies did is they used psychedelic drugs as a means for enlightenment. This has, I think, traditionally been a fact. People, instead of doing the hard work of doing tapasya and meditation, just take a drug and bing, quick and easy enlightenment, So that was kind of normal. It wasn't like I was unusual for doing that. Everybody did that. So one of my experiences, I don't know what the drug did, but it must have released all the endorphins and hormones that make you happy, because I was feeling really like the kind of happiness, if you your best friend had a critical illness and they pulled through it and you meet them. Something like this is incredible. And so I had this very strong intuition at that time. I said, why would you have to take a drug to feel this way? It didn't make sense to me. So this very strong intuition was saying, there must be a way to do this without drugs. This must be something that you could activate, because when you take the drug, it's activating something. It's not like you have to do something to be happy. It just activates something in the brain or hormonally. So I was like, okay, I was thinking to myself, okay, I need to find this out. I need to find out how you can do this. This was really important because, as I was saying earlier, I was noticing that my parents' generation, they were telling us, well, get a good job and get a good profession and everything will be good. You'll have a nice home, etc. And I was saying, but that didn't really work for you. It doesn't seem that having things makes you happy. It seems that happiness is much deeper than having. Of course, if you've never had anything, it's hard to understand that it would, that's not true. But being raised in America, we had a lot. So it was easier to understand that. We had way more than we really needed growing up. So it's kind of intuitively, I felt that having or changing your situation or getting rid of something external to you is not really the cause of happiness. But I couldn't articulate it. It was just a feeling. So I began my search. Okay, I know. I was like, I know you can find this happiness. I just like knew it. I don't know why I knew it, but I knew it. And then something amazing happened. And we all know the saying, when the disciple is ready, the guru will appear. So in my youth, I was very active physically, not so much academically. I played every sport, and I didn't normally read much outside of class reading. I'm not that I wasn't intellectual, but just at that point in my life, sitting around was not, I just didn't like to sit around that much. And so I didn't really read outside of what we read for class. I think I read like one book, I read magazines, but I read like one book in my university life outside of what was required. So one day, I was a student at University of California in Berkeley. It was the top public school in the country. And I was walking down the street that leads to the university. It's quite a happening street, lots of shops and restaurants, record stores, bookstores, hippies up and down the street. And I walked into a bookstore, and I didn't know why I was in the bookstore, because I would never go into a bookstore and buy a book. I would always be like, let's go surfing, or let's do something, some sport. So I'm in a bookstore, and I'm thinking, why am I in the bookstore? I don't know if you ever done that. Have you ever like walked in a store and not knowing why you're in it? That was the situation. And I'm asking myself, why did you walk in the store? You don't even want to read any of these books. You're not going to sit down and read a book, or it's unlikely you will. And I didn't know why I was in the bookstore. So, in a bookstore, there's lots of books, right? So I'm walking up and down. It's like, well, I'm already inside, so might as well. Let's figure out why I'm inside. I've been directed into this bookstore, so might as well find out why. And I had some, you could say mystical inclination, although not trained that way, but on an intuitive level and also on a faith level. I had faith in God and faith in that kind of direction, that inner voice. So I knew there was some kind of inner guidance going on at that moment. So I thought, well, let's just follow it. And so I'm in the bookstore just walking up and down. And there's one book. I had some interest, not active interest, but you could say a general fascination with India. I don't even know why, but I just thought what's coming out of India was fascinating. You know, American culture, it's only 200 years old. So it's not that fascinating, you know, cowboys and, you know, motorcycles. And it's, well, you kind of know what American culture is now because it's been imported to India, you know, fast food store chains. You know, it wasn't like deep, it's pretty shallow. So for some reason, I thought, well, India must be deeper. It's got a deeper history and spirituality and so forth. So I saw this book and it looked Indian. And that was the only reason I took it off the shelf. I go, that looks interesting. It's Indian. It was the Bhagavad Gita. So of all the books in the bookstore, that's the one that was like, the neon lights were shining around that book. Bim, 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 bim. I didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy it. But a few days later, I was registering for courses. In those days, I don't know about in India, but now you can do everything online. But in those days, you would walk around the campus and there you would register for courses in the buildings where the courses were being taught. And you say, go to this room if you want to register for this course and sign up. And then if you get there late, it's already full. So you have to figure out what to do. So that's what I was doing. So when I was in the bookstore, I told myself, or Krishna from within, as super soul Paramatma said, you should read Bhagavad Gita. So that was implanted in my mind. I have to read this book. The person who never reads any books is now obsessed with getting this book. So when I was on campus, there was a person sitting behind a little table. He was a monk. I didn't know what he was. Brahmachari. There were brahmacharis on my campus in 1969, you know. Who would have guessed? And he had a sign that said Bhagavad Gita class, 4 units, which meant it was a class, it was a university class. I was like, that's interesting. A university class in Bhagavad Gita. So that was a no-brainer for me. I just went over and signed up immediately. And it was a Hare Krishna devotee, iskcon devotee, and they had opened a temple ashram 2 blocks from the university. And the person who was behind the table, it turns out, is from the same neighborhood. He lived, I could count right now, like I would say, probably lived 5 blocks from where I lived, where I grew up. So we went to the same schools. We had many of the same friends. I didn't know that. It turns out that I was living with 4 other roommates, and every one of them was his friend. So it was kind of interesting. Anyway, so I was this person with many questions, and I started reading Bhagavad Gita, and all the questions were being answered. And so it was like, oh, wow, I finally, this is amazing. You know, it was, I don't know. Have you ever gone shopping and you're looking for something and it's very special and specialized? Maybe it doesn't exist and you've created it in your mind. There must be a product like this. And you're looking and you go, there must be a product like this. There has to be. And you look and you look and you look and you look. And you finally get in the store and you go, wow, there it is. Somebody actually, I knew somebody would create. There's the book, you know? So when I was reading it, I was like, okay, this is the book I was looking for. And so what was nice about reading it, it was not only did it answer all my questions, but it answered questions I couldn't even have asked because I didn't even have enough knowledge to ask those questions. So answered all my questions and all the questions I should have asked if I knew more about spiritual life. So that completely changed my life. Now, you're probably going to think this is funny, but the thing that was so powerful for me. And for so many of us from the West, is, as I said, we never grew up thinking there's a soul and a mind and a body. We just thought, I'm the body or I'm the mind. So that was the first teaching of the Gita. You're not the body. You're an eternal soul. And, you probably heard that when you were in the womb. But for us, that was like, wow. I think for Indians, it may be hard to get the full impact. Although perhaps nowadays that may be also similar in India. Maybe, well, yeah, my grandmother said something about it, but I never paid attention. It could be more like that for you now. But for us, it was like, no grandmother, nothing, unless you delved into teachers of Eastern philosophy. The word soul was there in Christianity, but it wasn't clear. So that was kind of liberating. This isn't your only life. This isn't the first time around, not the last time. So that changed my whole perception of life. I was just thinking, I'm 19 years old, I'm an American man. This could be everything, or what I can remember was my life. I don't remember before. Who knows what's after? And to learn, no, this is not your first time around. You've been here forever. That changed everything. It changed my whole perception of my life. And slowly, I thought, I want to dedicate my life to bhakti, to service, to devotion. This is what I really want to do. And yeah, so that's what I did. And I started teaching Bhagavad Gita. You want to know what's really fun? It's to teach Bhagavad Gita to Indians, because they're supposed to know it better than I'm American. Why should I be teaching Bhagavad Gita to Indians? They're supposed to know it better, right? So I would just say it was a very interesting journey that this young American man studies Bhagavad Gita when he's 18, 19. And a few years later, he's in India and teaching Indians who all say, oh, we know Bhagavad Gita. And I'll say, well, that's good, but it's time to live it.
So it's like, you started your journey because you were very curious and keen, and you had many questions, and that is what made you start on the spiritual path. It's a very interesting story and beautiful to know about your spiritual path. Prabhuji, when you were 19 years old, you were very fortunate and blessed to meet Srila Prabhupada ji in person. So how was your experience when you first met him? And what were the learnings that you learned from him that you still carry in your life?
So if we put this in perspective, I was in university in October, the semester started. That's when I started reading Bhagavad Gita. These are 10-week semesters, and it ended in December around Christmas time. And so then at Christmas time, I went back home, which was in Los Angeles. It's about 7-8 hour drive from the school, and I had a car, so I drove back. And the temple, the Los Angeles iskcon temple, was 6 blocks from where I lived, where my parents' house. So I went there, just got in the car in 5 minutes, I'm there, which was interesting. Like Krishna was making things easy for me, right? Like, okay, you'll go to school, there'll be a temple there, and then we'll put a temple like near your home. Okay, that sounds good. You're really helping me. So I went to the temple one evening. That was the first time. And then now I'm thinking, this is what I want to do. I'm not brahmachari yet, but I'm thinking I want to do this. So I went back the next morning, and I didn't even know this. No one told me the evening before, but I found out that morning Prabhupada was arriving in Los Angeles. Maybe his plane was coming just about an hour or so after I arrived in the temple that morning. And they said, do you want to come? And so basically I just walked in the temple, said, we're all getting ready to meet Prabhupada. do you want to come? I said, of course. So I had read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita twice, so I knew something about him, but I didn't like official, I wasn't, we weren't trained to understand guru disciple. So I kind of understood it, but I kind of didn't understand. It became more clear when I saw Prabhupada, what guru and disciple is. So I was reading Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. I knew he started the Hare Krishna movement, and I knew people were initiated by him, but I was not thinking of initiation. I wasn't thinking of it in that way. I was just thinking, he's somebody I'm learning from. I didn't put the pieces of the puzzle together because that wasn't really what I was being taught at that point. I was just a new person. So they weren't telling me, who hadn't even committed yet to Krishna consciousness, oh, here's a guru, you should surrender to him. So I didn't understand that. But when I saw Prabhupada, then I understood it. And I'll tell you what I was experiencing. When I saw Prabhupada, I started crying. I just, was like overwhelmed. And actually at that time, I didn't know why. I was just, sometimes, you're in an overwhelming situation and you just get overwhelmed. You can't even calculate what's actually going on logically. It was just his power, his presence was such that it was like, wow, like overwhelming. And it was only until later that I understood why I was crying, because there was this sense, and it must have been subconscious at that time, or very subtle. There was this sense that this person is going to enlighten me. This person is not only going to enlighten me, he's going to help liberate me from samsara, the cycle of birth and death. He is actually coming to pull me out of this quagmire of materialism, of repeated birth and death, life after life. And I think that's why I was so overwhelmed. So that's one aspect of it. As you probably know, when you're in the presence of someone who's very pure, it has a tremendously purifying effect. We know that in the presence of anyone, we're affected by it, either in a good way or a bad way, right? So what to speak of someone who is completely pure, who is emanating prema bhakti, it's just love, devotion, purity. It's just coming out of his heart. So it's like light, if the room's dark and you bring in a light, it lights up the whole room. So Prabhupada's like this light, and then he's lighting us up. So we're dark. We're in the material world. We're dark, and he's lighting us up. And so now I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking, oh, I'm light. This dark person is light. Why am I light? It's not my light. So now we're reflecting his light. And so whatever he's experiencing, we're getting some of that. Whatever love of Krishna he's experiencing, we're getting some of that. Whatever devotion, happiness, enthusiasm, purity, we're getting that as a reflection of his light. So what happens in his presence, was I started to become somebody I couldn't imagine I would become, because I was reflecting his qualities. So my level of compassion, let's say, to help other people, my desire to live a more spiritual life, to do some austerity, to dedicate myself in service to Krishna and to spread the teachings of Krishna consciousness. It was just like being amplified, but I was just reflecting. It wasn't really mine. It was his, and I was getting it. It was like an osmosis. So, and that explains how Prabhupada spread the Hare Krishna movement in the West. because people were being infected by his qualities. You want to hear more about Prabhupada?
Yeah. Like, what were the greatest teachings of Srila Prabhupada ji that help you to transform your life?
Well, there are two aspects to a spiritual master: his person, his example, and his teachings. So there's no difference between Prabhupada's person, his actions, his consciousness, and his teachings. They're the same. But the example is more powerful because anybody can teach anything. But if someone is not living what they're teaching, it doesn't have power. So Prabhupada's presence was a personification of what he was teaching, and it had tremendous power. Our job as young devotees, our challenge was we had grown up in a very materialistic culture, which was extreme to enjoy life. So it's about me. Enjoy your senses, be free, etc. So now Prabhupada comes and he's saying that we should control ourselves, which is not easy, as we all know. And he's saying, control yourself. But in his presence, it was very, very easy. Now you can imagine, we are Americans being raised in the free love hippie era, which was basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So practically everyone, every youth in America at that time was affected by this in one way or the other, somehow. And here Prabhupada comes and says, well, if you're not married, you should be celibate and you should stop taking drugs. And at that time, vegetarianism in America was quite rare. People thought you would die if you didn't eat meat. So he was saying, don't eat meat, control yourself sexually, and don't take drugs. Like, how are we going to do that? That was like, we were so used to that. That was our life. His presence was so powerful, so uplifting, so spiritually invigorating, that these young men became brahmacharis, monks. It seems almost impossible. And if you talk to them, these young brahmacharis who are now my age, if you talk to them now and say, how did you do that? A lot of them will say, I don't know how I did it. It seems impossible. But at the same time, we understand that's the power of someone who has love of Krishna, that in their presence, you feel like you could almost do anything. And that, I think, in my life's experience, that there are many difficult things I have done in my life, but self-control is by far the most difficult, by far. And that's what we were doing. That was the name of the game. We were trying to conquer ourselves. So there's also another principle, and this principle is in the Bhagavad Gita. It's called param drishtva. Param drishtva means a higher taste. And in this verse, Krishna says, raso varjam raso piyasya. You can give up something if you replace it with something better. And so spiritual life is very, very blissful. It's very joyful, ananda. And I would say it was pretty much impossible to not feel this ananda deeply in the presence of Prabhupada. It was pretty impossible not to be extremely blissful in his presence, ecstatic. And so when we felt that way, it was very easy to give up the things he asked us to give up, to renounce our lust and our greed and our jealousy and envy and anger, kam, krodh, moha, lobha, like that. It was it was very easy to do it because in his presence, we felt this spiritual bliss, which is, it's so much greater than any material happiness. It's so much greater than anything we could experience from the things we were giving up. You know, how do you give up something unless you can replace it with something better? And what we were getting was so much better. It was very easy to give it up. So we, in his presence, we were able to do things that I think would be normally impossible for a 19-year-old, American boy. That's my experience.
So, Prabhuji, when it comes to spirituality, everyone has their own definitions to it. So, we want to understand from you is that how do you define spirituality? And also, how can spirituality benefit one in transforming their life?
I would say that I probably defined it differently at different stages of my life. At this stage of my life, I define it as living in alignment with spiritual teachings. In other words, my life becoming a personification of spiritual teachings. And so if we just understand the essence of spiritual teachings, then it will become clear. So what if you study any spiritual tradition, what is the essence? Yoga, connection with God, with the divine, through love, selfless service, realization that I'm not a physical being, I'm a spiritual being, and God is spiritual, I'm spiritual. There's a connection there. Living in a way that relationship becomes stronger, that love that I have potentially within my heart for the Supreme becomes manifest more and more. And I think what's specifically important is being practical about how that manifests. Like I could say I'm spiritual, and you might say, well, how do we know? Like, what are the symptoms? And there are symptoms in Bhagavad Gita. There are normal symptoms that develop self-control, compassion, cleanliness, honesty, samodhamma, equanimity. We are steady when the world's going up and down. We are not prejudiced. These are spiritual manifestations of advancement in spiritual life. So that's how for me personally, at this point in my life, that's how I define spirituality as a growing of love and devotion to God, but then that manifests in my relations and actions, relations with people in this world and my actions towards them. And I think the problem, not that I think I know, the problem that I see in the world is there are many religious people who are religious in terms of certain practices or rituals, but not in terms of the virtues and qualities that Krishna describes in the Gita that would develop in someone who's advancing. So I tend to look at those things as barometers, like how, if you say something and I get upset, tolerance is a sign, right? Or I get angry with you. That's not a sign of spiritual awakening or spiritual progress. Anybody can get angry. Anybody can be intolerant. That's just normal. If I see somebody suffering and it hurts me, I feel their pain, I want to do something. That's a sign of spiritual advancement. So my fear is that we could have a lot of religion and the world could keep going down and down unless people become spiritual. I'm not saying religious people aren't, but sometimes or often they're not. So that's how I see spiritual life. It has to manifest day to day. And another reason I like to look at it this way is because in my teaching, I teach all over the world. In my teaching, I find many people say, I don't know how to manifest spirituality in my life or in my work. And say, if I manifest spiritual qualities at work, people will walk all over me. So it's kind of like they feel like they have to like be spiritual before they go to work, be spiritual after work. But when they get in that competitive environment, dog eat dog environment, they kind of have to like throw it away, which is interesting because as we know, Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield. That was Arjuna's office, basically. So I like to say Bhagavad Gita was the first corporate, spiritual corporate lecture because it was the corporate headquarters of Arjuna, the corporate meeting room, right? And so, it's always good to remember that it wasn't spoken to a sadhu or a brahmin on the top of the Himalayas. It was spoken to a kshatriya, a warrior, right in the middle of a battle. So it's meant to be applied. And I think a lot of people misunderstand how the application of tolerance, forgiveness, humility, and so forth, because they think, well, if I do that, then I'll just be one big failure. And it's a question of redefining those qualities. We should never think that if I manifest spiritual qualities, I'll be a loser. I don't know about India, but I assume this is also happening in India slowly. But many, many companies in America and other Western countries in the world are starting to understand that leaders have to manifest these qualities. What you could call them sattvic qualities of goodness. They have to manifest compassion, humility, and so forth. Because if they don't, everyone's going to have trouble working with them, right? I mean, you like to work with a boss who's humble because he'll listen to you. If there's a problem, you can tell him and he'll say, thank you. Rather than, who are you to tell me? I've been in this company for 50 years. You're just a new person, you can't tell me. Compassion, if you're having difficulty, instead of chastising you, we help you. That's better, right? You'll get the job done if we help you. If we chastise you, you'll just become discouraged. Forgiving, you want to try something new and you're thinking, I can't be creative because if it fails, my boss will never forgive me. But if he's forgiving, say, let's try something new. And maybe I'll come up with some incredible new idea, as long as I'm not worried about being, chastised for in case it doesn't go well. So it's interesting. I find it so interesting that now today, at least in a lot of companies, they're realizing that we have to create this kind of culture. And what we see is when you have this very rajasic culture, it's very dog eat dog, and you don't like another employee because they're going to get your job. So you make up a story that they're doing this or that so you can get it. In that culture, yeah, you try to be a little humble and this and that, you'll get walked over. And that's part of the problem. Those cultures are so rajasic. That's unfortunate. But in the long run, sattva always wins out. And when you try to lift up someone, help your coworkers, you'll always eventually you'll go high, because the higher persons are the ones who are helping others, not the ones who are putting others down, isn't it? So I find that these qualities like tolerance, compassion, humility, honesty, forgiveness, these are qualities which manifest in spiritually elevated people, which we all need. Because if we're not tolerant, our lives become very difficult, and we make our lives difficult for others. And Krishna says in the Gita, on the spiritual path, if you don't learn tolerance, then the world will just push you around. Things are good. You're like, oh, great. I'm so happy. The next moment, things are bad. Oh, the economy crashed. I lost all my savings. Then now you're miserable. And life is like that. It's up and down all the time. And if you are going to go up and down with it, then you're going to go nowhere. So Krishna says, you have to be tolerant in order to transcend duality. So that's, like, why wouldn't we want to be tolerant? because duality is everywhere and we're getting pushed around by it all the time. And who really wants to be pushed around by it, right? And another beautiful thought is, if we look at qualities like forgiveness and compassion, we all know, we all recognize the world is lacking like in these areas. Like we need more compassion, we need more forgiveness, we need more honesty desperately. And so we could think, well, nobody's being forgiving, why should I? People aren't compassionate anymore, why should I? People aren't honest, you know, we've got to compete with people who are cheating, so I have to be a cheater. And then what do? We just add to the problem, isn't it? So there has to be an integrity within us that if compassion, honesty, tolerance, etc., forgiveness is the right thing to do, then if I do the right thing, it is dharmic, and dharma always wins, right? Dharma will always win, you know. Dharmic kshete, kurukshetra. You know, when Sanjaya said dharmic kshetre, kurukshetre, Dhritarashtra was thinking, yeah, the Pandavas are dharmic and my sons aren't. This is not looking good. they're in a place of pilgrimage, Kurukshetra, with dharmic Pandavas and my adharmic sons. And then the last verse of the Gita, wherever there's Krishna, there'll always be morality and opulence and victory. So if you do the right thing, it's always the right thing. The right thing is always the right thing. So I always like to think individually, okay, I could be forgiving or not. I could be tolerant or not. I could be compassionate or not. I could be truthful or not. But does the world need more or less of these things? Obviously, it needs more. So shouldn't I contribute to giving more? Because that way we can all make the world better. And it requires maybe a little deeper insight into how to manifest these qualities. But I encourage people that you should always manifest your best. And there's one little thing I want to say about humility. Humility doesn't mean that people will push you around. I mean, you know, Mahatma Gandhi was humble. He did quite a lot, right? I don't think we'd call him proud. So humility has its own strength, you know, in its perseverance and its allegiance to higher principles. Like Arjuna, you know, in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna said to Krishna, I don't want to fight because I don't see any reason to kill my relatives who are now opposing me. It doesn't make sense to me. Why should we do this? And Krishna's mission was to reestablish Dharma. So he wanted Yudhishthira Maharaj to be on the throne. Arjuna wasn't clear on that. So Arjuna was taking a very compassionate Brahminical stance. I will just become a mendicant. That's what he told Krishna. But when you go deeper into the Gita, you understand that even though this seems quite exalted, it was actually selfish. And that's what Krishna was telling Arjuna. No, this is not what you are meant to do. You're a Kshatriya, you're meant to fight. And finally, as we know, Arjuna accepted Krishna's instructions and fought. It was at the time that he fought is when he became humble, because at that point he was submitting to Krishna's desire. So humility means to submit to the desire of God. That's one of the meanings. So when he was being compassionate and very renounced, which looked really good from a certain perspective, he actually was being proud because he was just wanting to do what he wanted to do. So humility has, you know, it's different aspects. It's not just that humility is you stand in the back of the line and, you know, if there's anything to eat when you finally get there, good. If not, you tolerate it. It's not exactly like that, although it could have those aspects, but it has inherent within it a submission to a higher power and empowerment as an instrument. Let's say in your job, you know, they ask you to do something and it's difficult. So you pray to God, please help me. That's humility, to get empowerment to do this. Okay, I'm going to do it. He's going to empower me. So it may look like you're like super self-confident, but it's actually humility because does that make sense? You've put yourself in a humble position. in relation to the Supreme. Did that answer your question? Sometimes I can't remember. After I get into answering, I forget the question.
Prabhuji, you spoke about forgiveness. So, what is your experience with forgiveness? And how do a person forgive someone who doesn't even recognize that they have hurt them?
Yeah. I've been studying and teaching forgiveness for almost 20 years now. And there's a few things that I think are super important for people to understand. That if I'm carrying resentment, it's hurting me. It's like, think of it like a toxic cancer, an emotional cancer. So if we think of resentment as an emotional cancer, then naturally the first thing we think is, I have to get rid of this. And it doesn't really matter if the person acknowledges it or not, or apologizes or not. I have this toxic emotional cancer in my heart. I have to get rid of it. And so it's really important. It makes it easy if you think of it that way. Like, it's contaminating me right now. I'm doing this to myself. I'm polluting myself. So in my forgiveness workshops, there's a certain point where we get that we don't even think about the person. We just think about the resentment, that we're working on the resentment. It's like, you have a burn or a cut on your arm and you're going to the doctor and saying, oh, it was my uncle. My uncle, he's such a bad person. He burned me. He did this on purpose because I was misbehaving. And so the whole time you're thinking about your uncle, and the doctor's saying, let's focus on the burn, not on your uncle. So that's one point, which can make it much easier. And the second point is that to understand that it's actually two more points. If you're forgiving, it doesn't mean you're condoning. So if I forgive someone, it doesn't mean I'm saying what they did wasn't wrong. It just means I'm saying that I will hate the sin, but not the sinner. Okay, what you did was wrong. I don't approve of that. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you. So once you understand that, it liberates you, because people have this fear that if I forgive, the person's going to do it again, which may be true, but you can tell the person, I forgive you. Well, don't tell them if they don't think they did anything wrong. That'll just make it worse. But you can put boundaries on the relationship, even though you're forgiving. And I think the best example is a judge. Like, a judge doesn't like or hate somebody because he makes a judgment. So this is the judgment, you hurt me, but it ends there. It wasn't right. And by forgiving you, I am not saying that it's okay to continue to do that. And in some cases, you may not want a relationship with that person. And so people think, well, if I forgive, it means I'm trying to repair the relationship. If you don't want to repair the relationship, if the relationship is dangerous, it's unwanted, you can forgive and just say, I don't want the relationship. And as I said, if they don't know that they hurt you, don't tell them you forgive them. It'll just upset everything. So I think those are two things fundamentally that we need to understand to make it easier. So if I say, I just can't forgive, well, you're carrying this around. Do you want to carry this around? Of course not. Don't worry about the person anymore. Just worry about letting it go. Now, there's another lesson, which is a beautiful lesson, which really empowers us it makes forgiveness empowering. Sometimes people do things not because they want to do them, but because they're conditioned to do them. So sometimes people hurt us, not because they want to hurt us, just because that's their conditioning. And we all have experience, nice people not being nice, or nice in one situation, but they're conditioned to, they have anger issues, or they have bad role models, or they're intolerant people, or they have life issues which make living for them difficult. If when we are hurt, we can try to understand these things about people and think, well, did that person wake up in the morning thinking, I want to make, they're thinking, I'm going to make your life miserable today. I'm going to do this. The chances are likely no. The chances are it just happened circumstantially. And so that's compassion, is understanding what's the backstory behind this person's life that would cause them to do that. And this is also very useful in family relationships where a family member is may mistreat us. And, a lot of times in the problems with mother-in-laws, the way I see it is the mother-in-law in her days as the young daughter-in-law was serving her mother-in-law, and even though she may not have liked her, she did it because she felt that was her duty, and maybe sometimes it was difficult to tolerate, but she did. So she expects that with her daughter-in-law, right? Well, this is what I did. You should do it also. And the daughter-in-law says, yeah, but you weren't working. And the culture is different now, and et cetera, et cetera. And it can be hard for some of the older generation to understand that. They'll say, yeah, but still. Or maybe they had expectations for you that you would, quit your job, and, you have a career path you're pursuing. They want you to quit it and you don't want to. And they need your help around the house and so on. So if you go into their world and their background and their culture and their history and whatever challenges they may have had in their life, that compassion can often help you understand, oh, now I know why they did that. Now I understand it. And rather than experience it as harm that they're giving you, you start to experience it in a different way. You start to feel their suffering. So, you were feeling bad, but when you go into the world of compassion, you start feeling bad for them that they would act this way towards you. It's a complete shift. So I found that to forgive, we need this kind of view. And so forgiving becomes the catalyst for this level of compassion. And when you have this, it makes life much easier, because when you're being mistreated, you can understand, okay, this person is probably going through a lot in their lives, because the way they're treating me indicates some internal strife or some unsettlement, or, it could be that way their whole life. It could be some recent event, a divorce or whatever. So I found forgiveness kind of like a panacea, because it helps us understand why people may mistreat us in a compassionate way. So it doesn't hurt us. It just draws out more compassion for them, which is kind of the opposite of what normally happens, which is why it's so powerful. And one of the other things I experienced from forgiveness is this is amazing, actually. So, you know how when we hear some depressing news, or we hear something spoken to us that was deriding us or criticizing us from someone who we expected to be kind to us, it's very upsetting. And then it gets in our mind. And then we can't get it out of our mind. And the whole day or the whole week or the whole month or the whole life, we're upset. When you forgive, you've learned to take that upset and let it go. So now it's no longer affecting you. And it's kind of like pulling a tooth that's in pain. It's like, what a relief. I mean, it was a little difficult to pull it, but what a relief. And once you're relieved of that, you realize that why I was so stupid to hold on to it. Like, why would I want to carry that with me? I was just harming myself. So, having had that experience, I just learned to, like, if anything is disturbing, just not to hold on to it because I've learned to give up this resentment. So why don't I just learn to give up everything that I don't need? And so one of my friends was asking me, he said, how is it you can counsel people and not get affected by their problems? I say, I think it's because I learned this, like whatever is not helpful for me, even though the counseling session that may be very depressing for me, that they're going through problems, I don't hold on to things which would not be uplifting. And I think everybody needs to learn to do that, because we hold on to all kinds of stuff and we drive ourselves completely crazy sometimes, and we can't let it go. So if we develop this attitude of, it's kind of like a self-care, self-love. I care for myself. So because I care for myself, I'm not going to allow myself to meditate on things which are just going to disturb me. And it's a great art to practice, because it makes life a lot easier. And whether it's material life or spiritual life. Does that make sense?
So Prabhuji, thank you so much for enlightening about forgiveness, because that is one of the aspect that we face in day-to-day life, and at times it gets so difficult for us to accept the mistakes of someone and forgive them. So thank you so much for giving that wisdom to us. Also, Prabhuji, you have mentioned about humility. So when it comes to humility, there are different ways and people have defined in their own way. So many people say that humility is when a person feels unimportant, undistinguished, or being a loving servant of others. So we want to understand from you is, what is humility? What is meant by humility? Or your definition of humility? And when does humility become servility?
Yeah. I like to think of spiritual qualities in a practical way. So I think one of the most practical manifestations of humility is the ability to cooperate with others, especially when we don't agree with them. So let's say you say something and I think that's crazy. But if I manifest humility, I'll say, okay, it sounds crazy to me, but tell me, I want to try to understand it. So I put the whole ego aside, right? And I say, okay, maybe this is a better idea. It doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Tell me, explain it. I'm listening. Wouldn't that be amazing if everyone had that humility, where we put our ego aside, I'm right, you're wrong? Pride manifests in the need to prove that I'm right and you're wrong, which certainly doesn't work in relationships. And we all have relationships. That's what it's all about. We don't live in caves. So without humility, how are these relationships going to work? I believe strongly that anyone who's a leader has to be introspective enough to recognize their blind spots, to see their faults. And so you may say, oh, Mahatma, Prabhu, when you do this, it is upsetting people. And I'll say, I don't do that. You don't know what you're talking about, right? And then you'll be completely frustrated with me if you're working with me. And they're like, we can't do anything. He's disturbing everybody and he won't acknowledge it. So humility means the ability to take feedback or to be introspective on your own, to see what are your faults with the mood of improving, not to become depressed about them, but being objective about who I am so that I can be a better person. So you might say, well, we really need you to be more understanding of these other people here. And I say, okay, then I reflect. Maybe I have a difficulty understanding people with whom I disagree. And I start thinking, yeah, I always think I'm right. That would be humility. And if I need to improve myself and I don't acknowledge it, I can never improve myself, because then there's nothing to improve. So humility is the basis for growth. There's one the biggest in America, maybe the world, Tony Robbins. There, he said something, I think it was at a workshop seminar. You know, he does like 10,000 people. He said something that offended, I think it offended some women, or maybe it offended some gay people, something like some group was offended by it. And he felt they misunderstood what he said. So he explained, I didn't mean it the way you understood it, but I understand that you understood it that way. Perhaps I shouldn't have said it, and I want to apologize. He made a public apology. And I was so happy when I heard that, because he teaches these things. And to see him doing what he's teaching, it's like it's endearing when someone has these qualities. Like, you want to work with people like that. So, you know, when people say you can't be humble in the workforce, I say that that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, because it's the lack of humility that's causing all the conflict. Now, what is another symptom of a lack of humility? It's criticism, right? Now, I don't know about in India, but in America, there are talk shows which are politically based, and all they do is criticize the other party. Do you have that in India? You have shows like that? Or they just, you know, I don't know the parties in India, but the BJP or whatever, I think, you know, just bad mouthing them, or vice versa. And people love it. They love to hear criticism, isn't it? It's just very weird, very strange. It really plays into a very low aspect, a low chakra. So criticism is a manifestation. Pride is a manifestation of lack of humility. Nobody likes working with people who are proud. Nobody can work well with people who are proud. And it's also a psychological problem, or it supports the psychological problem. Because if I criticize you, it's only so I can look better. And so how are we going to work well together criticizing? In marriage, the number one predictor of divorce is criticism and contempt. And contempt is just a higher level of criticism, you know, shaming. Contempt is basically shaming. So I'm criticized, oh, you don't know how to cook, you know, you're always late, this and so that. And then shaming is like, you're stupid, you're useless, you can't do anything right. Yes. So it's the number one predictor of divorce, which means it is the number one predictor of destruction of any relationship. So in the corporate world, where this whole "don't be humble, I can't be humble" came up originally, to me, many people, what's more important in the corporate environment than getting along? Those are the companies that win in the end of the day, right? The ones that get along the best. They have the most enthusiasm, the most energy. And in fact, they did studies that showed if you take average people that get along and you take above average people that don't get along, the average people will be more successful, more creative, come up with better ideas than the more qualified people who don't get along. Pretty interesting, right? So I think we understand that. It's kind of obvious. So humility is like the basis for all of this.
Prabhuji, when it comes to spirituality, there is one more aspect that we hear is finding the purpose of life. So here I want to understand is that is the purpose of life of everyone same, or is it different depending upon who you are?
One of the biggest problems that we have today in the world is we want to we have homogenized milk, where you have that in India, where the cream and the milk become one. The cream doesn't come to the top. Do you have that in India?
Yeah, we do have.
So our culture is kind of becoming more homogenized in the sense that we establish what are the professions that are respectable, the professions where you'll earn the most. And then that kind of becomes the standard of good. If you're in one of these professions, then people will respect you. If you're in one of these professions, you will respect yourself. And one of the great causes of unhappiness is to be in a profession which is entirely against your nature. And I have a story for you. By nature, I'm a teacher. That's what I do. And I love to teach. And if you go online, my YouTube channel, Mahatmadas, you'll find that I give over 150 classes a year. And it's just normal for me. I love doing it. I've written 3 books, and 2 more are about to come out soon, and working on more. This is what I love to do. I've created about 10 courses, seminars, workshops. But there was a time where I had to engage in business because of financial considerations. And I practically had a breakdown because it was so much against my nature. And you know why I had the breakdown? Because I was around business people and I was seeing how much they love business. And I was thinking, this is their world, this is their ground, this is their turf, this is their life and breath. They love it. They talk business, they eat business, they go to bed thinking about business. They love it. And I have a friend who, when he was 45, had enough money to retire. And guess what he's doing now? Business. This is like 15 years ago, he could have retired. And he's doing business now because that's what he loves doing. You can't stop him, right? So I was with these people who just love business, and I'm not inclined to that. In fact, if you make me do too much business, I just get depressed and tired and frustrated. We all have that experience, right? You know, if I say, okay, it's time to wash the dishes, you go to sleep. If I say it's time to eat pizza, you wake up, or whatever your favorite food is. I think pizza is like number 1 in the universe now, right? Favorite food. So, it's for me as an American, this is one of the most interesting things. And I understand why in India, being an engineer, software engineer, or an accountant, doing an MBA degree, business, doctor, lawyer, engineer is so important economically. But just like in the movie, The 3 Idiots, what does it produce when you force somebody into an occupation? So they'll have a lot of money, but they'll be unhappy. And why it's interesting for me is that America's not like that. We've never really been like that, where we are to some degree, but I think India is more so. And India was never like that initially, right? So, and the whole Bhagavad Gita is like you have your varna according to your guna and karma, your qualities and your activity. We can understand you're a teacher, you're a business person, you're a leader, military, or a worker. And the problem in society today is we don't respect these lower jobs. So who want you know, I want to tell you something funny. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I travel a lot, and there's a lot of countries that all the cleaning is done by machines. Big trucks come and they clean the street and they have brushes and like that. There's a lot of countries where people just sweep. And I was recently in Mexico, and we go for a walk. We walk every morning in a park. About 6:15 we go. And the street sweepers are out there, the park sweepers. And we always talk to them. They're actually happy. You'd be surprised. They're like, and I have this experience. I don't know about in India. That may be a different thing. But in Mexico, we said, they say, thank you for cleaning the park. They're smiling. They're getting a lot of exercise. They're out. They're not in front of a computer all day. They're out in the park. They're actually happy. But I think what's happened in the world today is someone would come up to them and say, if you just go back to university, you could get an education, you could make more money, and then you'll be happy. That's what's happening. They're telling people who somehow or other are happy, making their pots, clay pots, because that's what their father did, or making their chitai, or whatever they're doing, and telling them, no, you're not going to get rich doing this. You need to get an education. So I understand that. I understand the parents want them to not have to live the life that they lived. But the problem is, come to America and see 20% of the people are depressed. We have everything we need, but it's not that we're happier than the potter in a village in India. He's much happier. So it's very interesting for me to see this. And especially interesting because Bhagavad Gita teaches that we should act according to our occupational propensity. That's a fundamental teaching. That fundamental teaching is more well followed in the West than in India, it seems, today. I was with some young Indian students who were IT students, and I said, if the world changed in such a way that the best occupation in the future, the most lucrative financially, would be organic gardening, would your parents have you study organic gardening? And they all said, yeah, that's what they would have us study. So it wasn't a question of, is that your nature? It's just a question of what would be the best financially. So I understand that. I totally understand that. But at the same time, it leads to a dead end. Then I asked, there's a lot of Indians in America who are now in their 30s and 40s who either went to school here and then stayed here and work for IT companies like Intel, Cisco, Microsoft, and so forth. And or they did they graduated in India and then got jobs in America. And basically they're working kind of long hours, and with the commute, it can be up to close to 12 hours a day. And I said, are you going to inspire your kids to go the same route? And they said, no, because they experienced it. I said, no, I don't want them to live like this. I sit in front of a computer all day, and sometimes it's stressful. Sometimes we have to work on weekends. We have deadline projects. I was with a friend to finish. He was a manager of a group. He was in America, and he was managing a group of software engineers in India, and they had a deadline. So we have that experience in America. We know that that's not the way life should be lived. And we all have a nature. And when you act against your nature, you become quite unhappy, quite depressed, for sure. But as I said before, the thing that amazes me more is how in India, the whole Bhagavad Gita is based on acting according to your duty. And Arjuna wanted to be a Brahmin, and Krishna said, no, you're a Kshatriya, you have to do this. And Arjuna could have said, well, there are better job opportunities as Brahmins, and it's easier, and I'll be happier. You could add that into it if you wanted to Bollywoodize the Bhagavad Gita a little bit. But Krishna still would have said the same thing. He said, it doesn't matter. You're a Kshatriya. This is what you're supposed to do. This is your dharma. So it's unfortunate. The thing about America, which is different than India, is it's a different economy. So you can actually live a decent life no matter what you do. Where I know in India, there's a huge difference between a software engineer and a potter, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that obviously creates problems. But still, I think in the long run, you'll go full circle. You'll come around because there'll be so much unhappiness where, okay, you've got the nice apartment, you've got your car, you've got everything, you have no financial worries, but maybe you're working in an occupation which is really difficult for you. It's not something you look forward to, and you just do it, and it can be quite draining and depressing. And so you have purpose physically on that to maintain yourself, and you have spiritual purpose. And ideally, if your Varna can manifest spiritually, that's the best. So what you like to do can be of service spiritually to the world as well.
Thank you so much for enlightening us on these topics. So, Prabhuji, before winding up this episode with a bhajan of yours, I want you to give a message to all the audience watching this episode.
Well, this is going to sound funny. Maybe. One of my messages to people, which keeps coming up, and this I'll explain it, so don't get shocked. But this keeps coming up. Don't be stupid. And I find that nowadays in the world, there's a lot of lack of thinking. Basically, like we're acting without thinking. We're not seeing things clearly, and so therefore we do stupid things. So don't just follow the crowd and just do what everyone else is doing, but think about what is right. Be intelligent, be philosophical, ask questions. Try to understand beyond your varna, beyond your what you want to do with your life in terms of your job, family, and so forth. What is your real reason for being here? It's not just to be a consumer. It's not just to get a job, make money, and buy things. And it's not just to get some prestige, to have a lot of titles on your calling card. And it's not upward mobility in your company to get a bigger position. These are not goals which are ultimately of great consequence, because it'll all be finished in a few years. So we want to be intelligent. We want to ask deeper questions and come to deeper conclusions about who we are, why we're here, and where we're going. And books like Bhagavad Gita. This is your book. In India, it's your book. I'm reading your book. I'm teaching you your book. There's something wrong with that picture, isn't it? Read your book, think, question, philosophy, where the world is going. Where's materialism going? Ask questions, think about it, discuss it. Be smart. That's my message.
You are well known for your bhajans and kirtans. So how can we end this episode without listening to a bhajan of yours? So I request you to please sing a bhajan for all of us today.
I'll sing a song about Vrindavan. This is a song my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, would sing before he would give classes. And this song describes the places in Vrindavan and what Krishna does in Vrindavan. Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari. So Radha and Madhava are in the kunjas of Vrindavan. Gopi Jana Balaba, Krishna's dear to the gopis. Gopi Jana Balaba, Giri Bharadhari, he's the lifter of Govardhan. Jashodanandana gives pleasure to Mother Yashoda. Braja Jana Ranjana, to the residents of Braja or Vrindavan, he delights them. Jamuna Tira Vanachari, he has many leelas on the banks of the Jamuna. So we'll sing for a minute. That's okay?
Yeah.
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Balaba Giridharadhari Gopi Jana Balaba Giridharadhari Jasodhanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jashodhanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Jashodhanandana Rajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Panachari Jamuna Tira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Sri Radha Madhava Ki Jai.
That was indeed a blissful one, and so beautiful to hear it from you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for singing that for us today, and thank you so much for enlightening us on various topic and wisdom today. It was a very lovely session and a lovely conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining. Hare Krishna.
You're welcome. I hope it helps somebody.
So, well, viewers, today we were in conversation with Mahatma Das ji. Well, I hope that the wisdom that Prabhuji has shared with us today would help you all to grow spiritually. So, with this is Ayushi Pharasi signing off. Stay tuned to PMC English for more updates.